Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today I want to talk about a book that I've read, one that is about immigration and New York City, which is very weird and very fitting for my channel. What kind of person would ever live in New York City? I am referring to Beautiful Country by Qian Julie Wang, which was published in 2021. For those who don't know, Qian Julie Wang is a writer, but she's more known for her lawyer stuff, or not really known. She's not a big name in the law field, and she's probably more known since she had a New York Times bestseller. But she originally became a immigration lawyer. She did commercial litigation too, but she clerked for an immigration judge and did her best to help people become naturalized citizens. Which is important because that's part of her past, which she discusses in Beautiful Country. She was originally from China. She's Chinese American, and she was undocumented at first, and she's gone through the perilous immigration process, which you've seen in many writers discuss recently. Before eventually deciding to tell her story. This is her first published book, and wow, it is a doozy of a first book. If this is what her first book is like, and also if this is what her nonfiction is like, I can't wait to see what she writes, if she ever writes fiction, which she might not. Without further ado, let's talk about Beautiful Country. I will do a summary, a brief analysis as best as I can, since this is someone's life after all, and then we will move on from there. So Beautiful Country focuses on the Wang family, primarily on Qian Julie Wang, although it begins by talking about her father, whose brother was executed by the Chinese government for speaking against Mao Zedong. He basically pointed out that Mao was turning the Chinese citizens against each other during the Cultural Revolution. And this also brought great shame to Qian's father's family, and as a result, Qian's father had a lifelong sort of hate of the communist government and never became a full communist himself, and so he kind of did not like what China had become, whereas Qian's mother seemed to like the country of China. She didn't have any major gripes against it, at least, and she seemed to be somewhat successful as she was a professor and had gotten stuff published before. But most of the story takes place in the 90s. So this is a 90s book, essentially, or maybe not. But it focuses on Qian after she moves to America in 1994. First, her father goes, and then her father says, "Oh, everything is great. You should come here too." And so Qian and her mother decide to go, although her mother is very hesitant because, again, things seem to be going great for her in China. And once they arrive in China, they discover that their father kind of lied a little bit about what to expect in America. They're living in poverty. They're experiencing a great deal of racism, having to hide who they are because they are undocumented. They did not go through the legal immigration process. And there's a lot of stress for their parents now because they are working multiple jobs to make ends meet in order to give Qian the life that they think she deserves. Qian's mother especially works in a sweatshop where Qian does some labor too. And Qian's mother goes through many jobs in her time, quitting each one, mainly because they don't respect her. They're exploiting her labor, and she feels that she deserves more given her educational background and her career background as well. Qian starts school, and she goes to a school where they don't ask about her identity, her immigration status. And at first, they put her in a special needs room because she she doesn't speak English, but she quickly grows to love books and reads a lot and quickly learns English that way, which I found to be very interesting. And so she is put back in the second grade class and seems to be doing a lot better. But she is still hungry and she doesn't have a lot of friends. She's especially hungry because her parents don't have a lot of money, and she's skipping breakfast because of the commute to school. She lives in like Brooklyn, and her parents sent her to school in Manhattan, so she'll have more opportunities. But again, this means she's not getting breakfast, and so the only meal she's really getting is lunch and the meager dinner that her parents provide, which slowly grows better over time. But again, they don't have a lot of money, so like any amount of food is still not barely enough and barely nutritional for a girl like Qian. Qian talks about her mother's many jobs, including some that put her in contact with people who are obsessing over Asian American women, objectifying them, including one man named James, who everyone calls, or at least Asian individuals call Lao Jim, who's a rich white man who seems to have an obsession with Asian women and will do anything for company, even spending lots of money on individuals. And he comes to really love the Wang family, even going so far as to take them to McDonald's each week in order to, get their attention or something like that. And during one trip, they meet Jem's girlfriend, who seems to be a woman who is clearly exploiting Jem, taking his money, which is perfectly fine to take money from the rich, especially when they're exploiting the immigrants. But anyways, when Jem goes away for a little bit, the woman says, like, he's a creeper, right? Like, he especially creeps on Xin. So Chen doesn't get to hang out alone with James as a result, and her mom keeps a closer eye on him. But he's still in her life, I think, because the Wang family doesn't really have that many other options for friendship at the time. So around this time, her parents grow more distant because there's a discrepancy in what the mom wants and what the father wants. The mom wants to return to China or go somewhere else in America because there aren't a lot of opportunities for her in New York City. She's trying to go back to school, but she knows that even if she gets her degree in this school that doesn't ask for her immigration status, she's not going to find that many places because she doesn't have the right papers. And the father is perfectly fine with staying exactly where he is. I think he doesn't want to upset the status quo. And again, he doesn't want to go back to China because China didn't treat him well originally. At the same time, James gives Qian a cat, which she names Marilyn. She has a great time with the cat, but it seems to highlight her own father's kind of powerlessness, and he treats the cat kind of poorly, even going so far as to eventually just kick it out of the house entirely, although Qian feeds it outside from time to time. Eventually, her mom develops what they think is cancer, but it actually just turns to be something of gallbladder and liver issues, which they eventually again find out to be related to the lack of nutrition in their diets, which the doctors say, if you change your diet, everything will be fine, but they don't really have the money to do that. So it does take some finagling to make that work, and in the process, Qian grows really sad because she's no longer able to support her mom in the way that she used to, and her mom's not really talking to her as much anymore. Again, accentuated by the growing rift in her parents' relationship. Qian eventually is able to pass a test and get into a very gifted school, which she stays in for about a year and makes some friends, although she becomes very aware of her poverty and her immigration status again, which doesn't really help her too much. Her mom and dad get into a fight in which her dad smacks her mom, and they end up fleeing to Canada because her mom hears about a program where Canada needs trained and educated immigrants, and they go to Canada and seemingly are able to to get in there and things are okay. Eventually the dad follows and the mom and dad are together again, but their relationship is damaged far beyond repair. And they're able to go back to China because they have the papers to lean back on. And Qian relearns more about herself. She recognizes herself again, having missed China all this time. Qian eventually grows up and turns to law and gets a job in a clerk position before realizing all the traumas of her past are facing her again, and she's forced to confront it with the help of the judge that she's working with. And that's where the story ends there, with Qian recognizing and realizing these traumas and hoping to grow and be in a better place because of them. In terms of analysis, there is a lot to talk about with this story. I know it's very difficult to analyze someone's life as it might not fit the patterns that we typically see in fiction, but there is still some stuff worth talking about here. One thing that Qian talks about throughout this story is fear, specifically the fear of being found out that a lot of immigrants typically deal with. The Wang family is constantly in fear of being deported. They came to this country for opportunity, and they're worried that someone might find out that they don't belong here, and that they'll be kicked out of the country as a result. And because of this fear, it ends up leading to consequences for their life. They learn not to trust other people. Specifically, Qian's dad tells her repeatedly, say that you belong here. Say that you've lived here your entire time. Because if not, we might be separated. If not, we might be told to leave. And this follows with their interactions with the police, how they don't trust the police at all. They don't even trust the paramedics who they associate with the police. And to some extent, this creates a sort of xenophobic feeling, or a fear of outsiders, a fear of foreigners, because you can't trust other Chinese people. You can't trust people of color, anyone really, because any one of these people could betray you if it in your warped mind because of this situation you're in. They could betray you at any time if it benefits them. And so this constant fear makes it hard to make friends and makes it hard to connect to others, which is especially troubling for Qian, who's so young and needs those connections to really understand and learn more about herself and grow as a person. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. "Only later, after living many years in fear, would I understand that the risks were much lower than we believed at the time. But in the vacuum of anxiety that was undocumented life, fear was gaseous. It expanded to fill our entire world until it was all we could breathe." And that's really getting at the fear that they're feeling, that it's filled their entire life. And because of that, they can't trust people. They can't really do things. They won't let Qian really be alone on her own. And it's suffocating, really. It's terrible. And I know things might have been a little bit easier in the 90s because you didn't have the NSA, or not the NSA, but the Patriot Act or all that stuff, spying on people. But there was still a lot of stress. Even pre 9/11, things weren't easy for immigrants. And this is saying a lot for a time where people proclaimed Bill Clinton to be progressive when he actually wasn't at all. And again, this constant fear can't be healthy. It creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress within Qian and her family. Qian especially, who feels like she needs to keep this secret because if anyone finds out, her family will be ruined. And this continues long into the future. Again, Qian is recognizing all these traumas and how they shaped her at the end of the story. And it's really sad, but there's another interesting quote that I would like to read to you. "In the peace and quiet of Canada, there is too much room for the voices and fears in Baba's head. The sunlight shines too brightly onto the fault lines the preceding 5 years had carved into our little family. Possibilities open anew before us, but we cannot see past the razor edges we had grown for protection in that beautiful country." And there you see the fear, how that fear has grown, that it's grown so big that even when you're no longer in that terrible situation, it's all you can feel. That at some point someone's going to pull out the rug from under you and you're no longer going to be able to have the small successes that you've enjoyed. So again, what does this say about our immigration system? That it creates this fear, it creates this unhealthy system. And Children of the Land, which I talked about a few months ago, Marcelo Hernandez, I believe his name was, pointed out that even in the legal immigration system, the bureaucracy drove you crazy and caused undue stress and led to depression. So if we can't even fix the legal immigration system, what hope do those who enter through undocumented means do? If we can't fix the legal immigration system, it's going to lead to more undocumented citizens. But because they're undocumented, they're going through all this pain, and so there's so much suffering in a system that doesn't need that suffering. The suffering machine that we created doesn't need to exist. So stop sending people to it. Another thing that Qian talks about and does well is she focuses on the ills of poverty. So the unfortunate side effects that happen as a result of it, such as hunger, a lack of opportunities. For Qian in particular, she can't go to certain places like museums, but also for her family. Her mother can't afford to go elsewhere, to go out, maybe the city for cheaper groceries or something like that. It leads to actual illness, especially for Qian, who at one point breaks her wrist in the story, and she can't tell anyone about it because if they find out, they're going to make her go to the doctor, and her family can't afford those medical bills. It eventually heals, but think of the unfortunate consequences of not getting that looked at. So a lot of unfortunate side effects there. There's also a bunch of mental health effects, as Qian talks about in the story, the anxiety and depression and the stress that she feels, that builds up and makes her feel greatly uncomfortable, to the point where she's talking to her mother, and her mom's just unloading upon her, telling her stuff that mom probably shouldn't tell because they're stuck in this situation. This is the only thing that can be done. And it only makes Qian feel worse, oh, I'm the reason my parents are feeling like that because they're trying to make a better life for me. But Qian, it doesn't make her feel any better. It only builds up to the trauma that she feels by the end of the story that she's realizing. And I think it's beautiful how that trauma comes about. Not necessarily the trauma itself, but how Qian writes about that trauma. Because it's building up, and as you read the story, you're like, wow, this person who's writing this, I hope she's doing okay, because this can be very painful and very unfortunate. As someone who's grown up in poverty himself, I know firsthand how it can hurt you and make it hard to adapt later in life. And so when she reflects on that at the end of the story, you're like, okay, it's good that she recognizes that. It's very powerful that she recognizes that, and she's looking at herself and is trying to bury it, as we all try to bury the painful aspects of ourselves. But I think she realizes that in burying it, it's just going to make it worse. You can't run from the pain. You can't run from the sadness and the life that you experience, because that's the denial of who you really are. And you're never going to feel complete that way. But also, why would you want to absorb all that pain? I think that's what Qian gets at the end of the story, is there's so much of it. You can absorb a little bit at a time, but if you absorb too much, that's going to make your life somehow even worse. And I think that's a unique situation for a lot of people in poverty, especially a lot of undocumented immigrants who have had to go through all these stressors. And I really think that Qian does a great job of explaining it and really painting a different side of immigration that I haven't really seen before, especially from someone who's had that experience. Qian also talks about topics like escapism and exploitation. Escapism in that she turns to books and other things in order to get away from her parents' unhealthy marriage, in order to get away from the fact that she doesn't have many friends, which is sad throughout the story, but very eye-opening, as I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, and I often turned to books, and I'm still turning to books, although I have more friends now. Escapism and also the exploitation of immigrants is very prevalent in this story. Qian's mom works in a sweatshop and doesn't make a lot of money, and everyone who is going to employ her mom is going to exploit her in some way, despite the fact that she has so many great credentials. It's a terrible reality of immigration, and I like that Qian addresses it here. I also think the title is very interesting in that it's a bit of an ironic title. It's called Beautiful Country, which comes from the Chinese phrase Meigu, which is the description of America, where America is supposed to be this beautiful land. But throughout the entire story, we learn that that's really not the case. The racism, the poverty, the sweatshops, ignoring illnesses, just having a difficult time. Is this really a beautiful country? How can it be beautiful if it's so full of suffering? There are some points where Qian notes that there are beautiful moments, but I think largely this is very damning for the American immigration system, very damning for the politicians at the heart of the story. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama, many others, which I think is particularly interesting because Obama put this on his year-end list for 2021 of his favorite books. And at the beginning of the story, she criticizes Obama by saying he offered false promises. And that makes me think, did he actually read the story? Does he know what it's about? Because this would suggest that either he hasn't read it or he doesn't realize that it's slightly about him. Because Obama's policies, Trump's policies, every president's policies led to the system where people have to hide and that the country isn't as beautiful as they proclaim it to be. And especially damning is that in order to get away from all this, the family flees to Canada, where things are slightly better, not 100% better, but the mom can work in a career that maybe matches what she needs. It matches her expertise, because they're looking for immigrants who are skilled in her areas. And America, has a very labyrinthian immigration system, as described in Children of the Land, that makes it hard for even the most talented people to immigrate. So, I think the title is very ironic, and I love how Qian kind of portrays that through the story, acknowledging it at several points that this country is kind of far from beautiful. And the last thing worth noting is the writing of this story. I feel that the writing is what makes this story exceptional. This story is very sad. It's constantly going from one hardship to another. Very necessary to read about those hardships to understand the immigrant experience in the United States. Even in the 90s, I still think this is applicable to today. But it's amazing writing that allows the emotions to flow off the page in a way that I haven't really encountered in the past, feeling everything that Qian felt at that time. I can't sympathize 100% because I wasn't an immigrant. I've been in poverty, but I don't know her complete experience. But she does allow you to feel what she's feeling through her words. And I really think that this story peaks with the ending, that it just keeps building and building and building. And then you get to that ending where she reflects on all that trauma. And it really hit me pretty hard. It made me cry because for her to recognize that trauma and understand that she's more than that, and understand that she's also trying to run away from that can be pretty hard. That she bared everything in this story. I felt at times I shouldn't have been reading it because, wow, this is intensely personal. You should be telling your therapist this. And she probably was telling her therapist this, but I do feel it peaks there because of how it just crescendos with her recognizing all of that emotion that's been building up. And I would be very interested in seeing where she takes that, because I hope she heals from whatever trauma that she's been going through, or at least comes out of it a better person, not letting that carry with her throughout her entire life. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Beautiful Country by Qian Julie Wang. A very interesting story that I definitely 100% recommend. This is a fascinating story published last year. I love the emotion of it. I love how it critiques the immigration system. Maybe not 100% willingly, maybe that's just a byproduct of her writing. And I love how kind of relatable it is for someone who's lived in poverty. I might not know her whole experience, but I can understand part of it. So I do recommend it to you out there if you haven't read it yet. If you have read it or you want to comment on something I said, do so below. Let's have a discussion about this very fascinating book. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this author and her work. Hopefully she publishes other stuff in the future. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and beautiful travels. Farewell.